All right, so I am going to begin with an experiment. It's a very brief experiment. It's got two simple phases. It's got a baseline phase and a comparative phase, and I need a subject. Okay, here we go. It's going to talk about science, but not about technology, but here I have mastered a bit of technology. Okay, so again, I am going to stare for 5 passionate seconds into your eyes. And then I'm going to take some baseline readings. So I need your hand. I need to take your pulse. And it appears to be beating at about the normal rate of approximately 72 beats per minute. And I need to stare into your eyes, specifically at your pupils. And they appear, though the light is a bit dim, to be at about normal size of 4 millimeters, which does not say much for the effect of my passionate gaze. Now, the comparative part begins, but it begins with a story. So I have kind of a divided life as a writer. Lately, I've been writing a lot about desire, but I also write a lot about Africa and about race. And almost to the day, a year ago, I was in Sierra Leone, and I was way out at the Liberian border. I was writing a story about a gold prospecting company, and I was on my way back from that border post with one of the gold companies, sort of logisticians and just the Sierra Leonean who kind of made it all work. It was a Western company, and we were driving back along this 10-hour route, rutted, cratered, etc., and he was asking me what else I did, and I told him I was working on this book that was about to come out called What Do Women Want? It was all about women and desire, and needless to say, that led to a quite raucous conversation between me and Mustafa, and then off in the distance, alone, walking along this rutted dirt track, was this woman, and she was dressed gorgeously in these yellow and blue or purple robes, and Mustafa said, you know, when we reach her, you really need to get down and speak with her. And so we pulled up, and I did get down from our vehicle and began to chat with her, and she was on a perpetual circuit between Niger, hundreds, if not 1,000 miles away, by foot to Sierra Leone and every place in between, selling medicines. And the reason that Mustafa thought I absolutely had to speak with her was that 2 of her medicines were relevant to our subject. One of those medicines would give me, she promised, manpower. An herbal Viagra was offered. I was interested, but the second medicine seemed to be more relevant to me at that moment. She said that if I put it on, any woman would love me, and she meant, there was no doubt, love in the lustiest sense. So here, since I was about to come up with this book about women and desire, I got instructions from her, and I bought her powder, which I have a small amount of here. And it came not in this, which is from CVS, nor this, which is a little baggie you can buy in any supermarket, but it came wrapped in this little blue scrap of plastic. But in preparation for our little experiment, I've sped things up and just put a little bit of the powder here. I'm going to dump it into this little vessel from the Sierra Leone branch of IKEA. And hope that Poland Springs doesn't mess up the whole deal. This is just an everyday spoon, not a magic spoon. I'm going to stir it up, and I'm going to paint it just like she said I should. Okay. And we have to let it soak in before phase 2. Which gives me a chance to veer, because actually when I got this invitation from our speakeasy hosts, I started thinking about that moment, and I realized that it didn't come out of nowhere for me, that I've sort of been searching for magical and very true power in Sierra Leone and elsewhere in Africa for a long, long time. So I want to sort of veer now away from sex, which I've been talking about a lot lately, and perhaps at my own peril, away from comedy, and to tell you a little bit about Sierra Leone and that search. So at the time that I started going there 15 years ago, it was mired in civil war, but it was, as it always has been and still is, a gorgeous place. So I want to tell you about a very few things. One, these cotton trees that dominated the landscape in this upcountry village where I spent a lot of time there, between 15 and sort of 11 years ago now. And these cotton trees are immense. They're immense vertically, they're immense around, they're kind of like the vague equivalent of our redwoods, except that they have these giant buttresses that fan out at the bottom, these giant wings that kind of enclose you, and the air is so damp in that rainforest, and these wings are wrapping you in, and I always felt like I was sort of in this halfway space, a kind of womb-like space between Earth and some other, and the unearthly. You also need to know that Sierra Leone, to veer from the unearthly back down to Earth, was the absolute poorest country on Earth at that time. By UN measures, by World Bank measures, and you need to know a little bit about the war and about a man named Lamine, who I came to know very well, who, as militias attacked his suburb outside of Freetown, the capital, had a rebel soldier come to his door. His teenage daughter was in the back of their small house. He wanted to give her time to get away and climb out through the back window, or he knew she'd be kidnapped and he might never see her again. And he did succeed in doing that, but in the process wrestled with this soldier, had to run from this soldier, was caught by this soldier and others of the militia, and this was the signature brutality of Sierra Leone civil war, was forced to put his hands against the roots of a tree, and his hands were cut off. And that was the common brutality in Sierra Leone for many years as an emblem of intimidation. Allowed to live, but allowed to live handless. The last little thing you need to know is that things were so desperate that UN peacekeepers, thousands of them, had been utterly futile in ending the war. They'd in fact been kidnapped by rebel soldiers, and the British, the former colonial power, had come in, and things were so anarchic and so desperate that there were many, if not most, Sierra Leoneans who wanted to be recolonized, at least temporarily, by the British. Now, the story. So I want to tell you about this medical student, Michael Hosea, who I met in Freetown back then. And I want to tell you about his two lives and his two minds. He was absolutely determined to graduate from medical school. He'd been determined since he was a little kid in catching frogs and dissecting them, determined since his father had died of tuberculosis that went undiagnosed. He studied basically by candle in his kind of wrecked half-concrete home, studied biology, studied biochemistry, was avid about that. But his problem was this. He went to his medical school classes when they were offered, but whenever any militia came close enough to threaten Freetown, medical school shut down. And so Michael did what he felt he had to do. He went off and became a soldier intermittently with his medical school studies, and he soldiered with this group called the Camajors, which were a traditional or tribal-based group of fighters. And he would fight until whatever encroaching militia was pushed back, and then he would go back to medical school, and so on as the years of the war went on. And the interesting thing about it to me, one of the many, he was an incredibly compelling person, is that he, as part of the Camajors, felt ultimately protected from bullets, felt he could not be killed as long as he was wearing this special belt, which he'd bought in the market, handed over to a traditional priest, and that traditional priest had opened it up and poured special, unknown to Michael, powders within it, stitched it back up, and Michael felt that he was thus impervious to bullets. So 2 lives, 2 minds, and a plan. Michael's plan was that when the war was over, he would convince these priests to tell him at least the leaves and other substances that they used in their potion. He would publish these in Western journals, persuading the journals because he had an MD, or would have one by then, but meanwhile would withhold the key part, which was the priest's special blessings, and thus Michael's own life and Sierra Leone's existence would be transformed by all the people who would flock to Sierra Leone to be cured of various diseases. So for a moment, I have to break the speakeasy rule again at my peril, because I can't possibly do Michael's voice as an actor. I just have to read you a tiny, tiny bit, and I promise it is only a minor infraction. But so this is Michael speaking about his plan. I was doubting, like yourself, at first. When I was initiated, I was not willing to line up with the others and put myself in front of the gun. But somebody shot at me while I was not aware, and from that point onward, I became convinced. I have already told you about the bullet that struck my shoulder but damaged only my jeans jacket. I have told you about the belt that pulled tightly around my waist whenever an ambush was nearby. Now think of the great father of modern science, Albert Einstein. When he first proposed his theories, of course, some people believed he was an imbecile, but his ideas would conquer. His ideas would bring an empire to its knees. You will see the same things here with disease. Daniel, when I am ready, I will call you. From the other side of the world, you will come and be my witness. So I asked Michael to arrange a demonstration and with his most revered priest, and he said maybe when things became safe enough. And in the meantime, I sought out other demonstrations. There was Commander Snake, who agreed and lathered himself with a special sacred liquid and had one of his soldiers shoot at him and then pulled a bullet from a little bit of fat, a fold of fat in his belly, and everyone in the village cheered, and this was announced as proof, and to me it looked possibly just like your basic carnival trick, and yet everyone around me seemed convinced. There was going to northeastern Congo amid a war there, and again, hearing from militia members about how they could fight absolutely fearlessly, asking, if I could speak to their sacred commander, he agreeing to a demonstration as long as I would film it. And so I went off, to the closest town and actually found a place with a little, video camera. And, again, the slathered sacred liquid. Did I want to take one of the soldiers' AK-47s and shoot at the person with the slathered chest? I declined. And so somehow that seemed to create some caution amid the soldiers, so they actually put this floppy hat down on the ground. They doused it. AK-47 is aimed, shot. To me, it looked like the soldier who did the shooting jerked the gun up a bit. To me, it looked like the bullet hit, 3 feet away. Cheers of approval, proof finally delivered to the doubting Westerner. I bring out, the video camera, which has a monitor. We all watch it together. It still looks to me like the barrel's jerked, but cheers all the way around. The proof is right there in the video. So it's as though it's as though we're seeing 2 different realities. So 2 years go by, and Michael says he's ready, and he takes me up country to meet with the second most powerful Kamajor priest, Dr. Jabao, and we go to his dirt yard. There's the carcass of a car off to the edge of it that's sort of a bit of a crown possession. And he apologizes and says, because of disarmament, we're not going to be able to do any gun demonstrations, but there'll be plenty that I can see. One of his apprentices is slathered with the sacred brown liquid and eats razor blades. There's no magic abracadabra shop nearby. I forgot to check whether the razor blades had been filed. The wrappers looked intact. But then another teenage soldier douses himself in the liquid, lies down on his back, and his fellow soldiers start to beat on his chest with this giant rice pestle. You know, these things are like as high as this microphone stand and thick and heavy, and they're pounding as hard as they can. And the boy's chest is sort of collapsing and rebounding, collapsing, rebounding. He's smiling serenely. Daniel, do you want to try? Okay. I pick up pestle, it's heavy, and I start hesitantly and kind of tap at this boy's rib cage and start a little heavier, and by the end I'm pounding away, and his chest is collapsing and coming back. And Michael says as I pound, and he had a very precise way of speaking, he said, "You are going to exhaust yourself." And they say, "We're going to give you more demonstrations," and there are more demonstrations. And I still have this feeling like, is this basically just a very well perfected circus act? And then Michael says, "You see." Now, this would be the time when I would return to do the comparative phase. But there's this part of me that doesn't want to know the answer. And not only because I'm so desperate for female companionship and can't stand to the failure, the extra failure of having failed, even though I have the potion. But I guess because finally when I thought this through and thought back to that moment with the woman selling her medicines and then thought back and back and back to the other experiences, I just thought about how much is at stake. Michael wants to unify the world. Michael is pretty much exactly 4,031 miles from Coney Island, where we sometimes go for a little dose of, semi-magic. But he's over there, and we're not really aware of him. So instead of doing that and finding out the truth, I'm just going to read you a tiny bit more and break the rules one more time. This is just a little bit more of his voice that I always want to be heard. And this was when we were standing in the lab of the main hospital, which is the electricity was always going out. There was one crusty centrifuge. It was just not a hospital. His voice lowered in the darkened lab. The absolute cure for all cancers, for leukemia, for all the most dreadful tumors, for the most dreadful contagion, and by that I mean HIV, will come from here. Daniel, that is my dream. Through my work with the priests, my tests in the laboratory, I will publicize what these great men can accomplish with their powers. It will take time and dedication, but I will tell you for free, Sierra Leone will be a paradise. People will come from all over. The rich will come, the poor will come, the middle class will come. The hotels will be full. The hospitals will thrive. There will be such an economic boost, such a big economic boost, a boost you cannot imagine. And you will see me. I will be a rich man. Sierra Leone is a small country. Some do not know where Sierra Leone lies. But soon they will try to find where. Desperately they will try. You know that when someone is in pain, the most severe pain, he will pay anything in order to be cured. Anything you ask him for. Oh, Daniel, it will be paradise. Thank you.